Billionaire mom tried to humiliate the bride, but her reply left everyone speechless. Valencia Torres smoothed the fabric of her cream sundress as she stepped through the iron gates of the Ashworth estate. The gardens sprawled before her like something from a magazine. Manicured hedges, fountains that sang with crystal water, and roses that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "You look beautiful," Julian whispered, squeezing her hand. His warm brown eyes held genuine affection, the same look that had made her fall for him 6 months ago when he'd wandered into her bakery looking for birthday cupcakes. "Your mother is staring," Valencia murmured, noticing the sharp-eyed woman in designer silk watching them from the terrace. Octavia Ashworth commanded attention without trying. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled into an immaculate chignon, and diamonds glittered at her throat like captured stars. She'd built tech vision systems from nothing, or so the article said, and she wore her success like armor. The engagement party was already in full swing. Society types sipped champagne and picked at canapes while a string quartet played Mozart. Valencia recognized several faces from business magazines: tech moguls, venture capitalists, people who moved millions with a phone call. "Everyone." Octavia's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "I have a special presentation for our guest of honor." Valencia's stomach tightened. Julian's grip on her hand turned protective. Octavia approached with a velvet box, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Valencia, darling, we're so thrilled Julian found someone so genuine, so real." The pause before real landed like an insult. "I know this world can be overwhelming for someone from your background. The jewelry, the fashion, it's all so complicated." She opened the box with theatrical flair. Inside lay a necklace that even Valencia could tell was costume jewelry, glass stones in a cheap setting that would turn skin green within hours. "This should help you feel more comfortable at family events," Octavia continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Until you learn the difference between cubic zirconia and the real thing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Julian's face flushed with anger, but Valencia placed a calming hand on his arm. She stepped forward and examined the necklace with the careful attention she usually reserved for inspecting ingredients. Then she smiled, a real smile that reached her dark eyes and seemed to light something dangerous within them. "How thoughtful, Octavia," Valencia said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent garden. "You're absolutely right that there's a difference between what's real and what's pretending to be valuable." She met the older woman's gaze steadily. "I learned that lesson from someone far wiser than either of us. My grandmother always said that true worth isn't about what sparkles on the outside, it's about what you build with your own hands and how you treat people when you think no one important is watching." She carefully closed the box and handed it back. "I can't accept this. It wouldn't be honest. But thank you for reminding everyone here what really matters." The silence stretched like pulled taffy. Then from somewhere in the crowd someone began to clap. The drive to her grandmother's house was silent except for the hum of Julian's car engine. Valencia watched the manicured suburbs give way to an older, quieter neighborhood where jacaranda trees lined the streets like purple clouds. "I'm so sorry," Julian finally said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I knew she could be difficult, but that was—" "It's fine," Valencia interrupted gently. "Actually, it's probably time you knew something." She directed him down a winding driveway to a Spanish colonial villa hidden behind high walls covered in climbing roses. Julian's eyes widened as the house came into view. All terracotta tiles, arched windows, and the kind of elegant architecture that whispered of old money. "Valencia, whose house is this?" "Mine," she said simply, climbing out of the car. "Well, my grandmother's. She left it to me when she passed 3 years ago." Inside, the house was a museum of refined taste. Original artwork hung on cream-colored walls. Antique furniture sat beneath wrought iron chandeliers. Julian followed Valencia through rooms that spoke of generations of careful curation until they reached a study with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Valencia pressed a hidden button behind a leather-bound collection of poetry. A section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a steel door with a biometric lock. She placed her palm against it and the door clicked open. "My grandmother was Aurora Mendez," Valencia said, watching Julian's face as recognition dawned. "You might have heard of her company. Mendez Luxury Jewelers." Julian staggered slightly. "The Mendez? Your grandmother was the Aurora Mendez?" The vault was small but spectacular. Display cases held pieces that belonged in museums: sapphires the size of robin's eggs, diamonds that caught light and fractured it into rainbows, emeralds so green they seemed to hold entire forests within them. "She started with a single shop in Mexico City," Valencia explained, running her fingers along a display case. Built it into an international empire over 40 years. When she retired 15 years ago, she sold the company but kept her private collection and the brand rights in trust for me. Julian moved closer, studying a necklace that featured a cascade of blue sapphires. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted someone to love me, not my inheritance. Valencia turned to him, vulnerability flickering in her eyes. My grandmother gave up everything to build that empire. She missed my mother's childhood, sacrificed her marriage, lost friends. When she finally retired, she told me that all the jewels in the world couldn't buy back a single moment she'd lost. She opened another case and lifted out a simple gold locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman covered in flour, laughing in a kitchen. This was her mother, my great-grandmother. She owned a small bakery in Oaxaca. Abuela said her mother's smile was worth more than every diamond she ever sold. Valencia's voice softened. When she gave me everything, she made me promise I'd choose my own path. Not the one money demanded, but the one my heart wanted. Julian cupped her face gently. So you chose pastries over sapphires. I chose happiness over obligation, Valencia corrected. I open my bakery at dawn because I love the smell of rising dough. I decorate cakes for children's birthdays because their joy matters more than any profit margin. I chose you because you walked into my shop and talked about your niece's favorite flavors for 20 minutes, not because of your last name. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, his hands tangling in her dark hair. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. Your mother thinks I'm a gold digger, Valencia murmured. Julian laughed, the sound echoing in the jewel-filled vault. Oh, this is going to be interesting. Valencia's eyes glittered with something that might have been mischief. I think it's time Octavia Ashworth learned that assumptions can be expensive mistakes. And I know exactly how to teach her. Octavia Ashworth's corner office occupied the top floor of the Tech Vision Systems headquarters, all glass walls and minimalist furniture that screamed power. Her assistant had been confused by the meeting request from V. Mendez, CO, but Octavia's curiosity had been piqued enough to accept. She was reading quarterly reports when her assistant buzzed. Ms. Mendez is here. Send her. Octavia looked up as Valencia walked in, and the words died in her throat. Gone was the girl in the modest sundress. Valencia wore a tailored charcoal suit that whispered Italian craftsmanship, her dark hair swept into a sleek bun. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with the confidence of someone who'd navigated boardrooms before breakfast. Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Ashworth, Valencia said, her smile professional and cool. I'm sure you're wondering about this meeting. Octavia recovered quickly, her expression sharpening. Ms. Mendez, I wasn't aware you had a title beyond pastry chef. I have several, actually. Valencia settled into the chair across from Octavia's desk without being invited, a power move that made Octavia's eye twitch. CEO of Mendez Luxury Holdings, primary shareholder of Aurora Fine Jewelers, and board member of 3 international gemstone cooperatives. But yes, I also bake. It's therapeutic. She opened her portfolio and slid a document across the polished desk. I'm here to discuss a potential collaboration. TechVision develops smart home technology. Mendez Luxury specializes in high-end security systems for valuable collections. I believe there's synergy. Octavia stared at the proposal, then at Valencia, her mind visibly racing. Mendez Luxury. Aurora Mendez's company. My grandmother's legacy, yes. I inherited it 3 years ago. Valencia leaned back, perfectly composed. I've been restructuring quietly, focusing on private clients, collectors who need discretion and cutting-edge protection for assets worth millions. Your facial recognition and AI monitoring systems would integrate beautifully with our existing infrastructure. The silence stretched as Octavia scanned the proposal. Despite herself, she was impressed. The business case was solid, the numbers realistic, and the market opportunity substantial. Why come to me? Octavia asked finally. If you're who you claim to be, you could partner with any tech company. Because you're the best at what you do, Valencia said simply. I don't let personal feelings interfere with business decisions. Your systems are superior. And frankly, I thought you might appreciate the irony. Octavia's lips thinned. The irony of what? Of discovering that the woman you tried to humiliate with fake jewelry actually owns one of the most respected names in the industry. Valencia's smile was pleasant, but her eyes were steel. I'm not telling you this to gloat, Mrs. Ashworth. I'm telling you because I want to establish something clearly. I don't need your family's money or status. I never did. She stood, smoothing her suit jacket. I love your son because he's kind, because he laughs at my terrible jokes, and because he treats my bakery customers with the same respect he'd give a CEO. Those qualities are rare and valuable. More valuable than anything in my grandmother's vault. Octavia felt something unfamiliar, shame. It crawled up her throat like acid. I'll have my team review this, she said stiffly. Excellent. My assistant will coordinate. Valencia moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Mrs. Ashworth? I'm getting married in 6 weeks. I'll need to coordinate security for the event. We're expecting several high-profile guests, and some of the jewelry on display will be significant. I'd love to use Tech Vision services if you're interested in the contract. She left before Octavia could respond, leaving only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the echo of designer heels on marble. Octavia sat alone in her office, staring at the proposal that represented everything she'd gotten wrong about the quiet girl in the sundress. For the first time in decades, she wondered if she'd misjudged someone so completely that she'd damaged something irreparable. Her intercom buzzed. Mrs. Ashworth? Your son is calling. Octavia closed her eyes. Tell him I'll call back. She had a lot of thinking to do. The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in golden sunlight that poured through the restored windows of the Mendez estate. Valencia stood in her grandmother's former bedroom, now transformed into a bridal suite, while her cousin Sophia fastened the final buttons on her gown. The dress was a masterpiece, ivory silk that flowed like water, with delicate lace sleeves that whispered against her skin. But it was the necklace that made Sophia gasp. Abuela sapphires, Sophia breathed. Valencia, are you sure? Valencia touched the legendary piece, 3 strands of perfectly matched blue sapphires that cascaded down her collarbone, each stone the size of a thumbnail. The centerpiece was a rare star sapphire that seemed to glow from within, surrounded by diamonds that had once belonged to a Spanish duchess. She wore this on her wedding day, Valencia said softly. She told me that someday when I found someone who loved me for my heart and not my inheritance, I should wear it too. The estate had been transformed. The overgrown gardens her grandmother had let run wild were now manicured but still romantic, with white roses climbing trellises and fairy lights strung between ancient oak trees. 300 guests filled the restored courtyard. Tech moguls sat beside bakery suppliers, society matrons mingled with Valencia's culinary school friends. Octavia Ashworth sat in the 3rd row, her posture rigid, her expression carefully neutral. She'd accepted the invitation but hadn't spoken to Valencia since their office meeting. Julian had tried to mediate, but Valencia had simply said, she'll come or she won't. Either way, I'm marrying you. The string quartet began playing and Valencia walked down the aisle on her own. No one to give her away because, as she'd told Julian, she belonged to herself first and chose him freely. Julian's face when he saw her was everything. His eyes welled with tears, and his smile was so full of love that Valencia felt her own eyes sting. You're breathtaking, he whispered as she reached him. You're worth it, she whispered back. The ceremony was intimate despite the crowd. The officiant spoke about partnership and choice, about building something together that honored both individuals. When it came time for vows, Julian's voice shook with emotion. Valencia, you taught me that real value isn't measured in dollars or status. It's measured in early morning conversations over coffee, in the way you remember everyone's favorite pastry, in how you choose kindness even when someone doesn't deserve it. He squeezed her hands. You chose to love me when you could have anyone. That's a gift I'll treasure every day. Valencia's vows were equally heartfelt. Julian, you walked into my bakery and saw me, not my potential usefulness, not my connections, just me. You laughed at my flower-covered apron and terrible puns. You asked about my dreams, not my portfolio. Her voice softened. You made me believe that I could have both, the life I built for myself and someone to share it with. I choose you every day in every way. As they kissed, applause erupted through the garden. Valencia caught sight of Octavia dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and something in her chest loosened slightly. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom, recently restored to its original Spanish colonial glory. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables decorated with simple elegance. White linens, gold candles, and centerpieces of Valencia's favorite flowers. Sunflowers mixed with roses. But it was during dinner that the whispers really started. Is that really the Mendez Sapphire collection? I heard she owns the company now. Didn't Octavia Ashworth try to give her costume jewelry? Oh, that must have been embarrassing. Valencia watched Octavia's face grow paler with each overheard comment, watched her realize that everyone now knew what she'd done. Part of Valencia felt vindicated. But a larger part, the part her grandmother had nurtured, simply felt tired of the game. Valencia stood as dessert was being served. Her own creations, naturally, a selection of delicate pastries that had taken her team 3 days to prepare. She tapped her champagne glass and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice carrying clearly. "This day means everything to Julian and me, and sharing it with people we love makes it perfect." She paused, her gaze finding Octavia. "But there's something I want to address and a gift I want to give." Octavia stiffened, clearly expecting public humiliation. "6 weeks ago, someone taught me an important lesson about assumptions and value," Valencia continued. "It wasn't the lesson they intended, but it was valuable nonetheless. It reminded me that my grandmother was right. True worth isn't about what we wear or own. It's about what we build and how we treat people." She gestured to Sophia, who brought forward a framed document. "Mrs. Ashworth, I want to thank you for that lesson by presenting you with something I hope will honor both our families. This is the establishment document for the Ashworth Mendez Culinary Scholarship Fund." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Octavia stood slowly, confusion evident on her face. "It will provide full scholarships to culinary school for 50 students annually," Valencia explained. "Students from modest backgrounds who have talent and passion but not opportunity. It's funded equally by Mendez Holdings and, if you accept, by Tech Vision Systems. Your name and mine working together to build something meaningful." She stepped down from the small stage and approached Octavia directly, holding out the frame. "I don't need an apology, Mrs. Ashworth. I don't need validation or acceptance. But I'd like to give you a choice, the same choice your son gave me. To see past assumptions and build something real." Octavia took the frame with trembling hands. For a long moment she simply stared at it, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Then she looked at Valencia, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. "I was wrong," Octavia said, her voice breaking. "I saw you and made assumptions based on prejudice and fear. Fear that my son was being taken advantage of, that he'd chosen poorly. But the truth is, he chose better than I ever did for him." She drew a shaky breath. "I would be honored to fund this scholarship with you. And I owe you an apology, a real one, not a performance." "Then let's start over," Valencia said quietly. "Not as adversaries but as family." Octavia embraced her then, and Valencia felt the older woman shaking with genuine emotion. When they pulled apart, Octavia managed a watery smile. "You're wearing the Mendez sapphires," she observed. "I am. Would you like to know what they're worth?" Octavia shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I'm beginning to understand that." The rest of the reception passed in a blur of joy. Julian and Valencia had their first dance to a song her grandmother used to hum while baking, a Mexican ballad about love that endures. As they swayed together, Valencia felt Julian's lips brush her ear. "You could have destroyed her," he murmured. "Why didn't you?" "Because destruction isn't victory," Valencia replied. "My grandmother built an empire, but she told me the only thing she was truly proud of was learning, eventually, to choose connection over conquest." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "Besides, I got everything I wanted, you, a partnership based on honesty and maybe, eventually, a real relationship with your mother." "I love you," Julian said simply. "I love you too. Now dance with me before someone asks about the sapphire's insurance value." They laughed together and across the room Octavia watched them with something like wonder. She caught Valencia's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Valencia nodded, then turned her attention back to her husband, the man who'd loved her in a flower-dusted apron, who'd never needed her to prove her worth, who'd chosen her as surely as she'd chosen him. The sapphires around her neck caught the light and blazed like captured stars, priceless and beautiful. But as she rested her head on Julian's shoulder and felt his heartbeat against hers, Valencia knew her grandmother had been right all along. The most valuable things in life were the ones you couldn't buy, couldn't inherit, and couldn't fake. Love freely given, respect genuinely earned, and the choice to build bridges instead of walls. As the evening faded into night and the fairy lights twinkled like earthbound constellations, Valencia Torres Ashworth smiled. She'd started the day as a baker who happened to be an heiress. She ended it as a woman who'd chosen her own path, married for love, and built something more valuable than any jewel in her grandmother's vault. A future based on authenticity, compassion, and the radical notion that true worth had nothing to do with price tags. And that, she thought as Julian spun her across the dance floor one more time, was the most priceless thing of all. The end.